I am here today with Dr. Victoria Meyer. She is a carbon scientist at Terraformation, and prior to this role, she worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, developing techniques to measure forest carbon from hundreds of miles up. That is so cool. I'm very excited to get into this. And as somebody who's lectured engineering students at Caltech on science communication, you know how to translate some of this hard science to the masses. So let's start with kind of 101, Science 101. What is a carbon scientist? Can you explain to our audience what this means and what got you into this work?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to do this with you today. So being a carbon scientist means that I'm interested in everything related to the carbon cycle. So as a scientist, I'm actually specializing in forest carbon. That's kind of what I've been doing the last 10 plus years, but anything related to the carbon cycle, really. And so what it means in terms of my job at Terraformation is that I look at everything we do in our reforestation projects, like see where we're going to be planting the trees, how much carbon is going to be sequestered in those forests that we're planting, and what's the impact on climate change, and also in terms of like how is that going to impact the carbon market.
That was very concise. Let me ask you to get a little bit deeper into this. What is it about forest capturing carbon that's unique? Because obviously we can capture carbon in a variety of ways, but what is unique about forest capturing carbon, and what's the mechanism of action? How does this work?
Well, trees are the best way to actually capture carbon naturally, so through photosynthesis. So what happens is when you have trees growing, you have sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and those three components enable photosynthesis. So what it means is that the carbon dioxide that's in the air gets absorbed by trees, and through photosynthesis, the trees turn that into food, like carbohydrates. So when a tree grows, it accumulates carbon. Same way when we eat food, we grow, we gain weight. It's exactly the same thing with trees. Like the more they grow, the more they accumulate carbon. And their leaves, branches, trunk, roots, the whole tree is accumulating carbon.
We hear about trees capturing carbon. What about other technologies that capture carbon? Why don't we hear about it as much?
Well, to my knowledge, there is no technology to this day that's as efficient as trees to capture carbon. There's a lot of research going on. People are investing a lot of money in carbon capture technologies, but to this day, I'm not aware of any technology that's actually working as well as trees do.
So tell me, Victoria, what is the status of native forests and deforestation today?
Well, the short answer is it's not great. 95% of deforestation today is happening in the tropics. And as you may know, like a lot of carbon is sequestered in the tropics, but also most of the world's biodiversity is in the tropics. Depending on where you're looking at specifically, you're going to have a different answer. But for example, in Brazil, deforestation is going back up again. Now, if you look at Indonesia, for example, they're actually took some measures to decrease deforestation. So it's really based on where you're looking at, but globally, it's not looking that great.
I was going to just say, I've been hearing from recent reports that there's actually there's a date for when the Amazon will no longer be not only capturing carbon, but will be emitting more carbon than it's actually sequestering. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Is there really a date that we shouldn't, obviously the opposite of look forward to, but do everything in our power to push back or to prevent from ever coming into reality?
Well, the sad news is that some research is actually showing that this date has already passed in the Amazon. Actually, like parts of the Amazon are now emitting more carbon than they're sequestering. From being a carbon sink, it became a carbon source. So we really need to avoid this phenomenon happening at a global scale outside the Amazon, and stop deforestation, plant more native forests, and hopefully we'll push that date to like as far as possible, and hopefully never.
To never.
Yes.
I like that. Okay, I'm with you. I think we can make that date never come into reality. So why do we need to not just conserve forests then, right? To prevent forests from no longer being carbon sinks, we need to restore forests. So why do we need to talk about forest restoration as kind of this big picture, all-encompassing term, rather than just tree planting?
That's a really good question. And to me, forest restoration is a process that takes time. You know, it's like there is, you need to plant the trees, maintain them, make sure they're growing, versus just planting trees, which is just a one-time action, right? You go, you plant a tree, and you say, that's done, I'm done here, I don't need to do anything else. And so what we see happening today is that many organizations, they focus on the planting. And so they say, oh, we planted, 10 million trees in 1 year. But then if you go back a few years later, many times, most of those trees are dead because nobody took care of them. Like they planted them and they just let them to die. So that's the first part of what I understand as restoration, is that it's a whole process that it starts at day one, but then it takes years to, and also make sure that you're not just planting any tree. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase, plant the right tree in the right place. That's also part of restoration, where you need to make sure you plant native trees in the right place, and not just one species, but like as many species as you can to reflect the native native ecosystem. So restoration means that the land where reforesting has been degraded in the past. And so we really need to be careful when we think about reforestation. We need to take into account where we're going to be planting those trees. So there are so many areas in the world that have been degraded. We need to focus on these areas first, because we know that forests used to grow there. So like probably the conditions are still there for trees to grow.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. That's very clear. So we have to look at not just one tree, or a tree that is easy to generate in a particular habitat, but rather what is the ecosystem currently beyond trees? What's it look like as a functioning whole forest? And then the timeline. What was it like in the past? What's it going to be like in the future, given that the climate is changing rapidly? So looking at that big picture, that's what forest restoration really encompasses. And in addition to that, just planting a tree and moving on, that doesn't really explain it. We're looking to see, how do you maintain a restored forest as well, so that it really thrives in the coming future. So I get it. That is forest restoration 101. Yes. Okay, Victoria, in terms of carbon sequestration and ecosystem services, how do native forests compare to monoculture tree plantations?
Again, great question. And I think we need to start with defining what monoculture plantation is. So if you actually look at the definition by FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, a plantation implies that there is some kind of commercial activity behind it. So implying those trees that are being planted are going to be harvested at some point, or there's going to be some activity, something is going to happen to them in the long term. So once we know that, it's easier to compare the two. So there was a study that came out a couple of years ago by Lewis et al. Saying that native forests actually accumulate 40 times more carbon than plantations, which is huge, 40 times higher. Now, you can hear people say, well, but that's not what we mean by monoculture plantation. So like what happens if you just you plant a monoculture, let it grow, and then compare that to a native forest? So the answer to that question is a bit more complex, because it really depends on like what trees you're planting, where. So there's like, if you look at the literature, there's a lot of, there's different answers, but the bottom line is that most of the time you can have, the difference may not be that significant between the two. And keep in mind that the case where the plantation is just growing forever, it pretty much doesn't happen. So it's just, to me, it is more like a theoretical exercise here. So pretty much the same, up to native forests being like twice as efficient as sequestering carbon. And I can go into more details as why that is. But that first, I wanted to add one more thing, is that even if your plan is to have a plantation and to harvest trees, there's many studies showing that actually adding biodiversity to those plantations and like adding more species is actually better for the productivity of your forest.
No, definitely. Since, we've launched this series, I realized restoration of forests is so much more than what has traditionally just been thought of really as like, okay, planting trees. But you've really clarified this for us here. And it makes a lot of sense. This is an ecosystem. It's not just the one plant, right? It's how all of these different aspects really function together for what you're saying is 40 times more return. And that's what we want and need given the urgency of the climate crisis. So tell us that more detail that you said you could get into. How do these different aspects of restoring a forest all contribute to sequestering carbon?
Sure. So first of all, when you plant a monoculture plantation, like all the numbers that we get are for the first 10, maybe 20 years of the growth of the forest. Like because they get harvested very quickly after that, there's not that much data like showing that they're actually doing a good job after that. And on the other side, there's actually a lot of data showing that plantations are not good for the soil health. They kind of deplete the soil of like nutrients. They're not good for preventing, erosion and floods. And on the other side, you have biodiverse native forests that, first of all, protect biodiversity, are more resilient to any kind of disturbance. So when you have, it's the same thing in any field, like society, biology. If you have higher diversity, you have a better resilience and just a richer ecosystem. So if anything would be to happen, so like a flood or a pest, if you have a biodiverse, resilient forest, some of these trees might die, but other species are going to be very resistant to that specific disturbance. On the other side, if you have a plantation where all the trees are the same species, same age, same everything, if something were to happen to one of them, it will most likely affect all of them, and you would end up with no forest at all.
Makes sense. Okay, diversity is key here. We hear you loud and clear. So, given all of this, it seems obvious this is something we need to get behind. Yet, we're still facing challenges to actually see some implementation at large scale here. So, what are the largest bottlenecks that you see in reforestation projects, and how can we overcome these bottlenecks?
So, there are 4 major bottlenecks that I can identify for you today. The first one is costs and funding. So, as much as I love biodiverse forests, it costs more money to plant them, collect seeds, maintain them on the long term, as I said earlier. So between planting a monoculture plantation and planting a biodiverse forest is going to cost more money and more maintenance and all of that. So that's the first bottleneck. Like right now, there is not that much funding going to that kind of activity, and we really need to change that. Second bottleneck is the seed supply. So if we want to plant biodiverse forests, we need to have the seeds to plant those trees from different species. And without like a proper seed supply system or seed banks, it's really hard to do that. So that's why we're trying to focus on this at Terraformation, making sure that we have enough seed banks and that our partners can collect seeds, store them in a seed bank, and then use them to be able to plant a biodiverse forest. I would say the third one would be training and like making sure that we work with people who have a lot of knowledge about biodiverse forests. And I really want to emphasize how important it is to work with people on the ground and like local communities, because there is so much knowledge in those communities that like we might not have at a higher level. Like like every forest is different, even if you're like a super duper botanist and you've spent years studying trees, you're not going to know everything about, all the different forests in the world. So it's really important to find the right people in the right place and see if there is any practices that have historically worked in that area, which might not be working in another area. So it's quite complex, and I think that's why it's difficult, and training and knowledge is really important. The last bottleneck that I wanted to mention is time, because you might have picked it up by now, but it takes time to grow a forest, like to plan everything, to plant, and then to let it grow. And we, as your group is saying, like, we don't have time. And so it's really important to, make sure that we act fast, but also that we act well. You don't want to plant a monoculture plantation just because it's faster and quicker and cheaper, but in the end, you don't get the results that you want. It's always difficult to manage all of these things together, but I think once those bottlenecks are identified, it makes it easier to overcome them and move forward.
Okay, I love that final point that you made, that while we don't have time, it doesn't mean we need to be thoughtless or careless about how we think through really sustainable solutions to the climate crisis. We want the most bang for our effort here. And so let's really think through reforestation projects that are those nature-based solutions, one of many, to the climate crisis that we're facing. And thank you for the work that you do as a carbon scientist. It's critical to collectively contributing our expertise. Everybody has a role to play, and we can really overcome it if we get into this together. The solutions are at our fingertips. We need to work on deploying them to commensurate with the reality of the risk that's ahead for us. Thank you so much, Victoria. Really appreciated this conversation with you. Come back soon.
I will. Thank you so much for having me.
With me today is Diego Saez Gil. He's an ecopreneur, originally from Argentina, and he's the co-founder of Pachama, a tech startup with a mission of restoring nature to solve climate change by harnessing satellite data, AI, and the internet to help drive funding to effective reforestation and nature conservation. Among many accolades for Diego include being selected as Technology Pioneers by the World Economic Forum and Innovators 35 Under 35 by the MIT Technology Review. Pachama has also been recognized by Fast Company and Fortune magazine for its innovation and its impact. I cannot wait to get into conversations about how you got to this term. First of all, how you became an ecopreneur, how Pachama is such an innovative company that's had so many recognitions already. Start us from the beginning. I'd love to hear about your history as an entrepreneur. How did you go from entrepreneur to ecopreneur? Let's start with that.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me, Sweta. Look, I am originally from Argentina, a place called Tucumán in the north of Argentina. I grew up surrounded by beautiful nature. My grandparents had houses in the mountains, and I would spend every summer in nature. So there's where my love for ecology came from. But then I left Argentina to do my master's in Europe. Then I came to the US as an immigrant, decided to become an entrepreneur, was also very attracted by Silicon Valley and technology. So spent 10 years building technology companies and learning a lot about how to bring ideas into the world, how to raise capital, how to build engineering teams. And it was in a moment of personal reassessment that I came back to South America, and I did a trip with my brothers to the Amazon rainforest. And for the first time, I got to see the deforestation that is happening in South America, which unfortunately is one of the main drivers of emissions today, the way that we're burning forest. And meanwhile, we could actually be reforesting the planet. And we're going to be talking about that in a minute. But that is what led me to say, how can I apply everything I learned as an entrepreneur at the service of protecting and restoring nature and solving climate change? And at the beginning, I didn't know if I could actually start a startup to do that. But on researching and reflecting upon what startups are, I was, of course, I mean, a startup is bringing a bunch of smart people together to innovate and bring a product to market. And how can we actually bring products to market that are at the service of restoring nature? And that is what Pachama is doing. We've been around for about 4 years, developing technologies that combine satellite images, artificial intelligence, and software to build tools that can help drive more funding to reforestation and conservation of forests worldwide. And yeah, it's been amazing to see the world wanting what we're building, and receiving these awards, but also working with incredible companies that want to invest in restoration and conservation. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey that sometimes myself I cannot believe.
How is it that you're really using data, AI, remote sensing? How is that supporting nature restoration?
Yeah, so one of the insights that we had at the beginning was humanity has hundreds of satellites orbiting the Earth, collecting data of our planet. And we are not yet harnessing the full potential of that data to inform decisions on the ground. And artificial intelligence has made a lot of progress. Computing has made a lot of progress in such a way that today we can actually process giant amounts of data and create algorithms that make predictions that are very accurate. And we're seeing this in other fields, such as how Facebook and Apple can recognize our faces from a picture, or how Tesla and other self-driving cars can detect objects and plan the route of a car. Well, how come we are not applying that to determine how many trees are there in a forest? How much carbon do they sequester? What is the risk of deforestation? What is the risk of fire? And then use that data to plan and fund conservation and restoration initiatives. So those are the type of tools that we are working, developing, and that we hope to will unlock massive restoration around the world, because the land is there. We have enormous opportunities to put communities to work on restoring and conserving land. We just need the data and the tools to know where and how to do it, and then to use that data to finance those projects in a way that the backers can trust the impact of the projects.
I love that we're just at the tip of the iceberg for applying data to finding solutions. And I similarly say this about behavioral science. I'm a behavioral scientist, and we have barely begun to see the benefit of application of behavioral science and communication to really change views, to move people to action, to adopt behaviors that are aligned with nature restoration and conservation. And it just goes to show that there's so much potential out there, and we can definitely find solutions to some of these challenges that we're seeing at present, and that are obviously coming in the future as well. We just need to really unleash all of these different tools, from AI, big data, remote sensing, social science. I want to stick social science in there. There's
Sure.
a lot of talent and a lot of tools that can really help us achieve. And you said two different efforts here: restoration and conservation. A lot of people conflate the two. Can you tell us why conservation is just as important and should be spoken about in alongside restoration? Would you say that that's fair?
Yes, 100%. Sometimes it's easier for people to imagine the planting of a tree, right? And we all feel inspired by the image of tree planting, and trees growing and a new forest coming to life. And we need to do that. There is an enormous opportunity to reforest the planet. But almost more important is to conserve the forests that we have today. Humanity has already lost about half of the forest that used to cover the planet. That happened primarily on the developed countries that heavily deforested. Europe, the US used to be covering forest. But today we have left an incredibly important part of the forest of the world, the tropical forest, the Amazon rainforest, the Congo forest, the Indonesian rainforest, and it is critical that we keep them standing, not only because they are the largest carbon sink that the planet has, but also because they balance the climate in more than one way. The Amazon rainforest produces rain through evapotranspiration, and that rain then fertilizes the rest of the continent. And that is not to even mention the ecological and social value of those forests, right? These are the hotbeds of biodiversity, where so many species are, today struggling as deforestation expands, and so many communities benefit, from food and medicine and water that come from those forests. So it's incredibly important that we invest in conserving those forests as a solution to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And unfortunately, deforestation is driven by communities needing an income, right? So the main driver of stopping deforestation is actually creating an alternative income related to conserving forest. And that's why with Pachama, we focus on driving carbon funding through REDD Plus and other frameworks that can give credit to the additional carbon that is sequestered by keeping forests standing that are under real danger of deforestation. And as you said, it's incredibly important that we invest money, resources, technology, talent on protecting forest.
And you said it, just reiterate it for me. How do these forests compare to monocultural tree plantations in terms of how much they sequester? Because there's a whole ecosystem around these forests, right? That's really that's unique, that needs to be preserved and protected. How does it compare?
Yeah, I mean, definitely native old-growth tropical forests are the biggest carbon concentration ecosystems in the world, right? A hectare of Amazon rainforest compared to a hectare of pine plantations has much more carbon, but also it has much more life, has much more biodiversity. It has much more multiplier effect because, again, the biodiversity that exists in 1 hectare of tropical forest then, has a spilling effect to its surroundings. To do agriculture, we need the biodiversity that the forest generates. So, in the other hand, we also need timber, and we also need, wood as a material, which is a sustainable material to continue, building what humanity needs. So we do need tree plantations, but it would be a crime to deforest a native forest to do a tree plantation. And there are so many areas in which, if you're doing restoration for carbon and climate mitigation, what you should do is native species, native restoration. And then, yes, have other areas where we do sustainable tree plantations for timber creation. So I think that on the mission of humanity, when it comes to forests, we need to protect native forest, we need to restore native forest, and we need to do sustainable management and creation of timber plantations for the future of humanity.
I mean, it makes sense. I like it. It makes a lot of sense. From your point of view, what are the challenges? What are the different bottlenecks? What's really holding up some of these very obvious, clear solutions that you so nicely articulated for us?
Yeah, you're right. We need more awareness for sure. And social sciences, as you were saying, we need to, communicate. We need to tell the story to the world of the incredible importance of nature as a solution to climate change and the biodiversity crisis. We need money. Frankly, finance is a bottleneck here. We need more investments on starting new projects, not just on buying carbon credits, which again is a very valid vehicle for finance, but also on getting new projects started. And then we need data, and we need tools and technologies that can make the life of those on the ground easier. Today, if you want to apply to get carbon credits, let's say you're a farmer in Brazil who wants to apply to get carbon credits, it's an incredibly long and bureaucratic and expensive process. And we think that that should be easier, faster, and cheaper for landowners. So in that sense, we need more technologies, more tools, and better processes to do that. And then we need policy. Of course, we need the governments of the countries with forest to enact policies that would protect and restore those forests. There is so much that can be done with policy, and we need people to vote for politicians who will stand for nature.
Communication, money, and policies. Straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much for everything you're doing. I want to support all of your work. We're going to be doing that through this Restoration Conversation series, and the good work that Terraformation is doing as well to support restoration of nature. And, you know, when I meet people like yourself and the founder, Yishan Wang, who we had earlier in the series, the founder of Terraformation, and generally working in climate, there is just so many incredible people that really are looking to overcome this climate crisis that we're facing, you know, the bigger issue that destroying nature is leading to as well.
Yeah.
How likely do you think, from a scale of 1 to 100, that we are going to solve this climate crisis?
Look, I think that there is a good chance. I don't know if it's the most likely scenario. If we continue on the direction that we're going as a civilization, we are going to pay the consequences. There is a risk of civilizational collapse if we continue on the way that we're going. But I happen to be an optimist. I do think that even if it's a smaller chance, it's actually a pretty good chance. We have to act now. We have to, you know, rally everyone around the world to transform the way that we do things in this civilization. But I actually think that not only can we avert the worst of the climate crisis, we can actually also create an incredible future for future generations. The dreams of a utopian planet in which everybody is fed, in which we live in balance with nature, in which there is no more wars, that is possible. And we have to not stop dreaming for that. So I think that my mission is not just to help avert a catastrophe. It's actually to help create that super inspiring world for future generations. And I think we can do it.
Diego, that was so nice. I don't even want to say anything else and mess that up. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the optimism. It really comes across. And obviously you're channeling that in the work that you're doing. And so please continue being that ecopreneur and leading by example. And hopefully we will have new generations of talent supporting the challenges that we know we can overcome if we all work together. So together we are the solution to the climate crisis. That's our tagline. And I just wanted to end with that. Thank you so much, Diego.
Thank you so much for having me.